got
Save the
the
environment. You're like,
back.
no.
I need to redeem myself from my disappointing loss from Carrick. And then I lost sleep on Saturday.
Are you disappointed that you lost, or are you disappointed you lost the Carrick?
Honestly,
One of
I'm
the
disappointed that I lost. Because that was like a good. I had a lot of stuff done and said zero. Like I said zero.
So,
notes on everything.
You're disappointed in your
In
performance.
my performance, I went up there and it just shows.
The stage can be big sometimes.
Yeah.
It's,
Like LeBron in 2011. Yeah.
a couple weeks ago when we did logical fallacies, the main crux of it was, don't do this when it comes to appeal to authority or appeal to anecdote and things like that. It was, you want to be careful of using this stuff. Eloquence, is essentially the idea of you're establishing elements of persuasion through maybe kind of manipulating the wording of your argument. So whereas logical fallacies were beware, eloquence, the idea is embrace it. This is something you want to do. However, I would agree that just like plastic bags, it's moderation that's going to be the important element here that we're working at. I don't want every single statement, argument, phrase, words coming out of your mouth where you feel like you have to be utilizing eloquence all the time. If you overdo the eloquence, I think you can have the effect where it starts to come off as being maybe a little insincere. You don't really have an argument. You're trying to dress something up to make it look a lot better than it is. So the whole idea is that you want to kind of sprinkle it around. On Thursday, after we're done with eloquence, I'm going over the notes and reviewing it. On Thursday, we're going to start taking a look at our next topic, resolution that we're going to look at with Pitt. For the debate that we're going to do, you're going to pair up with someone, so we'll have 8 debates going on, and it's not going to be the same debate 8 times over, but it'll kind of be like an offshoot of a paired resolution that you folks are going to be debating. When we do that debate, a requirement is using X amount of examples of eloquence. You're going to have to use 3. So some of these things you naturally use, some of them you might have to kind of think about a little bit if you would want to use them, but it's not me going every single statement coming out of your mouth should be some kind of forms of eloquence or literary devices and things along those lines. Essentially why we look at why eloquence is going to be important, if it's done effectively, it certainly can move people a little bit more than plain language. So this could be something where you're using a lot of imagery. Nicole, what was it? Choking the baby sea turtles?
That's good.
And there's some imagery going on there that we're trying to avoid that from happening. So she's emphasizing a certain point by it. A big thing, though, for us to kind of keep in mind, because when it comes to arguments that we've pretty much done within an academic school setting, most of the time it's been written down. So if you make a key point, your teacher or the reader, whomever, can go back and reread the paragraph or reread the sentence. When it comes to a debate, an oral presentation, it's said, and then that's pretty much it. So the main way in which we end up probably using the eloquence is to help audiences remember and understand, but I'd say more so remember, because there's a lot of different types of repetition, syntactical things that get done that you can try to emphasize certain points, whether it be a parallel structure, alliteration, whatever the case may be, but you want to help your audience remember certain ideas because they don't have a script that they're going to be able to take a look at. Probably the speaker of the 20th century that is most famous for his use of eloquence would be Martin Luther King Jr., and we'll take a look at his I Have a Dream speech, which all of you or most of you have read before, where he specifically uses a lot of different types of eloquence within it to certainly kind of emphasize his ideas. Eloquence breaks down into 2 categories. We're going to take a look at schemes, and then tomorrow we're going to take a look at tropes. Schemes, you're looking at the arrangement of words. So this is more or less syntax, but involves a change in the ordinary arrangement of the words or the structure of the phrases or sentences. So you do something minor to help kind of emphasize points. So if it involves syntax, sentence structure, repetition, it is going to be considered scheme. Trope is when you change the meaning of the word, so that's more like figurative language type of stuff. Just like we did with logical fallacies, I have the term. We have a definition, we have an example. If we need more points of clarification, we can absolutely do that. For your quiz on Friday, there'll be 10 words, so not every single term that we look at is going to be on there. on Google Classroom already, besides the notes if you need them, is the Quizlet link that would have all the terms that you could go through and do flashcards for. Big thing, remember, this time it's going to be definitions as opposed to examples. So it's not going to say, step forward, Tin Man, you clinking, clanking, clattering, collection of calignous junk, but it would simply be alliteration, repetition of initial or medium consonants in 2 or more adjacent words. Sounds very formal when you use adjacent words.
Where's it from?
What? Where's what from? You want to go study film?
Hey, it's early, man. I literally just
Clanking, clanking, clattering collection of collisionous junk.
Look at that face of terror.
Some people used to film me with his little flip. His what was it called? What's the
His little flip.
They were called flips. Those cameras?
the flips,
Camcorders?
the tiny little thing. It looks like a, what I'm talking
Yeah.
about, right?
Yeah.
It's just a tiny little camcorder with a USB sticking out of it. It's called a flip, I'm pretty sure, right?
Yeah. I never had one. I know what you were talking about.
Okay, I'm not.
So not a flip phone, but its sole purpose is a
It's
camera.
literally just called a flip,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
My brother had one.
I agree.
Was it one of those things that was like, this will be the next big thing, and then like
Yeah.
phones just completely?
Yeah,
Yeah.
my sister had one. I think they were called flips.
Sophomore year of college, my stereo broke. We had things called CDs. I went out to Sears, which actually used to be open, and I bought a 51 disc Sony CD changer stereo. That thing was awesome for like 3 weeks until Napster showed up, and then we illegally downloaded all our music. But for like 3 weeks, it was like, wow, 51 CDs.
That's like a lot of seeds.
How much did it cost?
Yeah.
Probably no.
For hundreds, for 50.
It was probably around 250 to 300, I bet. Still in the garage. Still works.
What kind of what was on it? It's just what kind of tunes.
What do you mean?
What kind of
It's a
jam?
CD player. You put CD.
Oh, I thought he was talking like you literally bought like 51 individuals.
I thought.
No, I already had CDs. It was a carousel. The stereo was a carousel, so you could put the CDs. Oh, the same stuff that I still listen to in the morning when you.
That's like over $500.
All right, so alliteration, probably one pretty more straightforward that we've certainly heard before. For the second one, anaphora, here we have repetition, not just of a sound, but you have repetition of a word, or it could be a group of words at the beginning, which is going to be our key word here, beginning of successive clauses or sentences. So it could be repetition of an individual word, or it could be a repetition of a phrase. But at the beginning of multiple sentences or clauses, statements, you are repeating a key term. So Martin Luther King, let us march to the realization of the American dream. Let us march on segregated housing. Let us march on segregated schools. Notice segregated schools, alliteration. Let us march on poverty. Let us march on ballot boxes, more alliteration. March on ballot boxes until race baiters disappear from the political arena, until the Wallaces of our nation tremble away in silence. Reference to George Wallace, governor of Alabama at the time. I would say anaphora or anaphora, depending upon your pronunciation. I would say anaphora, probably one that would be good for you to utilize. But you would want to make sure you're using it just like alliteration for key points or key terms. But this is one by you literally repeating the word or phrase over and over again. Nick is going to start to ingrain into your mind the key point that he's trying to reinforce to get across to communicate. So this is an easy one to certainly get across to your audience. I would say, generally speaking, you probably want to have minimum of at least 3 repeats for it. And I'd say the same thing with alliteration. Generally, you want to try to have at least 3 words. With alliteration, make sure, like segregated schools, like ballot boxes, it would be a key term. You wouldn't want to use the terms, where, was, when, and go, I used my alliteration, because they're probably not going to be key terms. Same thing with the anaphora. Make sure it's a key term or a key phrase that you're trying to get across to your audience by repeating it multiple times.
One very effective public speaking or presentation technique is called anaphora, which means simply the repetition of a key word or phrase at the beginning of successive sentences. It's a great way of emphasizing a point, and Barack Obama used it often during his inauguration speech in January 2009.
The God-given promise that all are equal, all are free, and all deserve a chance to pursue their full measure of happiness. For us, they packed up their few worldly possessions and traveled across oceans in search of a new life. For us, they toiled in sweatshops and settled the West, endured the lash of the whip, and plowed the hard earth. For us, they fought and died in places like Concord and Gettysburg, Normandy, and Quai San. This is the price and the promise of citizenship. This is the source of our confidence, the knowledge that God calls on us to shape an uncertain destiny. This is the meaning of our liberty and our creed, why men and women and children of every race and every faith can join in celebration across this magnificent mall.
Can I interview someone from your book?
Who are you interviewing?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I need Carrick and Nick.
But they have a combined IQ of.
820.
It's for baseball.
820.
Notice I did not answer. I did not fill in the blank. I just said combined IQ. I let you guys fill it in.
Nick and 1 for Carrie.
Their combined IQs might add up to maybe like -5.
Now notice with the examples that we had here, the last one was a basic word that was simply getting used, this. But as long as the point of emphasis is clear to the audience, it does not have to be, a 3-word phrase like let us march. It doesn't even have to be like the for us that he was using. It can be a simple word, this, it as a pronoun, as long as it gets identified and you're reinforcing it, can certainly be used. So it's not that you have to come up with key, like some kind of fancy word or phrase, but you want to make sure it is clear what this is or what it is or whatever term you end up using is going to resonate with your audience. The opposite of anaphora would be epistrophe, where you still have repetition of a word or group of words at the end of clauses, but this is going to be happening at the end of the sentence or at the end of the clause. So anaphora, anaphora, you can think of as like A, beginning of the alphabet, E at the end. The one thing I would say is we're going to have a lot of A terms, so those are the ones that you're going to have to probably focus on to distinguish from one another. But epistrophe is essentially the same thing as anaphora, but it's happening at the end of the sentence. So as long as you were sent to Korea, Germany, and the South Pacific, you bled. As long as the white man sent you to Korea, you bled. He sent you to Germany, you bled. He sent you to the South Pacific to fight the Japanese, you bled. And whether it's epistrophe or anaphora, you're essentially emphasizing those words not only by the fact that you are repeating them, but also with the enunciation that you're using. That's where your emphasis is going to be placed. Boy, that was.
Was it yes or no?
What was the question?
There was only 2 questions. So she needed.
Do you play baseball? Yes.
What is your name? Carrick and Nick. Do you guys play baseball? Yeah. All right.
Looking forward to this yearbook.
I'm gonna read that.
I feel like this is only effective for speeches, though. It's tough to do this in an argument.
Debates are speeches.
What you mean, like as opposed to something that's written?
Yeah, like if I just have one really long speech as opposed to me trying to make like a 90-second argument, I feel like.
Well, okay. For a spar debate.
Yeah.
It would, and at no point in the year, because we'll probably do some more spar debates, at no point in the year is going to be, okay, in the spar debate, make sure you use an anaphora, epistrophe, whatever the case may be. If you know that you are doing something like plastic bags, personal well-being, maybe there's some alliteration or like an analogy, which will be one later, that you could have ready to go. But for all your other speeches, like the next one that we're going to do, you know what your topic is, you know who you're debating. Now, I don't want you to necessarily come up with a script, per se, but you could certainly have an outline where this is a key phrase that I want to make sure I repeat, over and over at the beginning, the introduction to get my point across, or at the conclusion to make sure they know exactly where I stand. I do think that the syntactical ones, the schemes, are probably a little bit trickier because they are so dependent upon you saying it right Whereas if we do something like imagery of suffocating, baby sea turtles and things like that, you don't have to say it in an exact way for it to get across. You can make an analogy, you can make an allusion, it doesn't have to be worded in a certain way. But I think if there are some key phrases, especially for like an opening that you want to repeat, you can make a note to yourself and be able to repeat those things. But yeah, if it's a rehearsed speech, there's a teleprompter in front of you, it is probably easier to get that across. But at the very least, you know who you're debating, what your points are going to be, that you can be a little bit more rehearsed for this than you would be for this part of it.
Did you say that our next one is going to be with the school system and set this up for succeed?
The wording of Pitt's resolution is American high schools empower students to control their future.
And
So-
we're going to know who we're debating.
You'll know who you're debating. No one is going to debate that topic specifically, but we'll come up with like subtopics that would pertain to it. But we're not going to listen to the same debate, 8 times.
As much as you get on your own.
I'm about to take down the whole school system. So.
Makes you ready.
Right.
And Ben, this could kind of be like a simplistic example of epistrophe. Gettysburg Address, that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. It's a simple repetition of people that's getting utilized. So it's not quite as, I don't want to say rehearsed, but as maybe complex as what you have with the Malcolm X example.
How do you know if one would be that or,
Epistrophe.
yeah. How do you know that?
And
Towards the end.
so that government of it, they're not really, they're more phrases than clauses. This is kind of in a gray area, but that idea that government of the people, and that government by the people, and that government for the people, it's essentially implied that and that government would getting repeated with it. So that's kind of the way that he kind of gets around it. But the idea is the people would still be at the end of those phrases. But it's not nearly as structured, as parallel as what Malcolm X would have here. More often, it's going to be along these lines. I would say between the two, anaphora, epistrophe, I bet anaphora gets used 3 to 1 more frequently than what epistrophe would. I think a lot of times epistrophe tends to deal more so with actions, like here, as opposed to anaphora could be like a group or concept, an idea. If you want to look at an action getting repeated, I feel like people tend to put that at the end of the sentence more, so than the beginning, just because of the natural subject predicate.
That's close.
How'd you say it? That's not terrible. Antimetaboly. 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 Ben already talked about this example in first period.
What did I say?
So this is repetition of words in successive clauses, but they are in reverse grammatical order. All right? So you take the same phrase, but essentially you reverse it.
Oh, you did.
I'll come back.
And so, my fellow
Oh,
Americans,
yeah.
ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Did you say it's a Boston accent?
He's from
He's like a New
Massachusetts,
England.
New England. Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Boston itself has probably like 20 different accents that
Boston
within
is
it.
intense.
So ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. So you take the same words, but essentially you flip them. It's in reverse grammatical order. Some people eat to live. Mr. Kane lives to eat. Okay? So it's the same thing. He was quick.
He was like, oh.
What was it? Yeah.
You're a
But Three
communist.
Musketeers were doing, yeah. So you take the same idea, you reverse grammatical order. All right. So antimetaboly. Tonight we're awakened to danger and called to defend freedom. Whether we bring our enemies to justice or justice to our enemies, justice will be done. So you see the antimetaboly, the reverse grammatical structure taking place. I did. Didn't quite look like Bush as much at the.
Wait, what was that? He didn't win best.
He was nominated. He was nominated. No.
Mahershala Ali won.
Yeah, Ali won for Green Book.
Mahershala Ali.
I was pulling for Sam Elliott.
I like Sam Elliott too. I don't know. Sam Elliott's the old guy. He's a real cowboy.
When did you watch all the movies that were nominated?
No, because they're all. They all look so boring. Dude, I only watch it. They all look so bad.
And a great. Don't full queen.
Kara got it.
Anadiplosis.
Anadiplosis. Sounds like a dinosaur. Sounds like a dinosaur, I think.
Like you've been stricken with anadiplosis and died in 3
So, anadiplosis is repetition of the last word of one clause, and then it's at the beginning of the following clause. So you end a sentence, clause, phrase, whatever with the word, and then the next one begins with that same word.
Oh my god,
This is usually what your English teachers don't want you to do when you're writing.
There was a song when I was like 9. What? No. Oh my gosh, like in the verses, this was how they wrote it. Like every single word is the last word, the last sentence.
Get ready for a dramatic soundtrack.
Yoda.
No.
This is like an Evanescence song for 2013. Right there.
I'll come back to it then.
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
Can I use that? If I use that in the way,
Oh my god.
Not when you were 9. So repetition of word at the end and then beginning of the next. Another movie that would use it besides you going and meet leads to suffering.
Make you glad you came.
Yeah, glad you came.
Yep.
It goes.
The whole course is like that.
Time is slipping away.
What is that from?
Stay with me, I can make you glad you can. And then the whole song
Yeah,
goes
it's
like
just
that.
that.
Because you're supposed to be sitting with like the
I didn't like that
maroon
Oh.
section over here, not way over there.
That was not.
Movie that is getting like very old very quickly, so people probably don't see it anymore. But Russell Crowe Gladiator.
Oh.
When Joaquin Phoenix is talking to Russell Crowe right before they're going to do their fight in the Coliseum, their battle. I forget the exact line, but he's the general who became a slave who became a gladiator who defies an emperor. That would be the same thing. Use of anaphylaxis. So you end the sentence and then you begin the sentence with it.
My name is Gladiator.
Hey, let's have one more A term. Antithesis. So, antithesis, we have the juxtaposition of contrasting ideas often written in parallel form. So you have two parallel statements or two parallel phrases that when you put them next to each other, they don't really go together. So the emphasis of the contrast is what becomes the antithesis. The sound on this is pretty crappy. It's the moon landing, 1969. So it's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. So you have a contrast between, for a physical human being, a small step, but for mankind, it is a giant leap. For those of you, and like paradoxes can kind of have this as well, but for those of you that read Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times.
It's the worst.
That would be, that opening, that beginning would be an example of antithesis.
Best of us.
Oh, for Neil Armstrong?
said that. Definitely.
You know, I think it was planned.
That's too epic to not plan.
But he said it wrong.
Yeah, he messed up.
Yes, he messed up.
It was
The whole
scripted.
thing was
It was
supposed to
not
say
real.
something different, but he ended up.
Moon landing is fake.
I want to hear the rejected
One
bits.
small step for a man.
Yeah, it was supposed to be one small step for a man, and then one giant leap for all men.
That doesn't sound
But he cut out all that.
Hey, when you're up on the moon, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Or in a sound stage in Burbank, whichever you want to go with. Doesn't matter.
Steven Kubrick actually told me to say that, and he just wanted to go a little improv instead of by himself.
All right, so tomorrow we're going to pick up where we left off with this. We'll finish off the schemes, and I bet we'll even get through all the tropes. Second half of the tropes. You'll be more familiar with those terms coming up.
Instead of like one word that you keep saying it in a sentence and then like watch them make a sentence.